Hello, and welcome back to Of the People. I'm Robert Chernin, and my co-host,
Ericka Redic.
And joining us today is Dr. Bruce Abramson, noted scholar, attorney, economist. I'm sure I'm missing something else in there, Bruce. And he's got a lot of letters after his name. There's a JD, there's a PhD, there's an MS. So when you think about the smartest guy in the room, Dr. Bruce Abramson is one of them. Bruce, nice to have you joining us.
Pleasure to be with you. And right now, I'm the only one in this room, so I certainly qualify.
Touche. Touche. So
funny too. Smart and funny. I like it.
Absolutely. Let's jump right into this. So I wanted to have you on the show, and I appreciate you coming on the show because your new book, The New Civil War About America Restoration, right?
Right.
One of the arguments you've made, and we've made here, is that this whole culture war, this whole wokeism, really borders on, if not actually has become a new religion of sorts, right? And we've talked, on the show about, sort of the Declaration and America's, America's founding and those kind of documents. But give us your take on that. Is wokeism a new religion? And if so, give us a little more depth as to how to understand it and put it in a frame of reference.
So that's a great question. And it is something I touch upon in A New Civil War. But it's really a subject of a series I've been running Sunday mornings on my Substack, which you can find at bda1776.substack.com. And we'll start with the most basic question, which is, what is a religion? Because if we don't know what a religion is, we can't really talk about whether or not wokeism is a religion. And it's a very important question because, the Constitution says that religion is special. First Amendment talks about freedom of religion. And we've got all sorts of rules that apply to religions. You have free exercise of a religion. If your faith tells you to do something, we don't want the law to interfere with it. We have a no establishment of religion that says that state institutions can't impose a particular religion on you if you're a non-believer. But we really have no explanation of what it means to be a religion. And let's think about the way that these different rules play themselves out. Just a couple of minutes ago, you were talking about Mayor Eric Adams' plan for New York City, where he was going to put social service kiosks around the city.
Right.
You could go to if you were thinking about committing a crime. Well, we can laugh about that.
Stupid.
And we can say that that's mind-numbingly silly public policy. But there's nothing wrong with it. If a mayor wants to put in kiosks for anything, he can, except not quite. Suppose that instead of social service kiosks, Mayor Adams came out with a plan that said, we're going to put confessionals around the city so that before you think about committing a crime, we'll have a Catholic priest talk you down. Or after you commit the crime, if you feel bad, you can go confess. Well, that he couldn't do. Right? That he couldn't do because that would be New York City imposing a religion in the public square. So we've got this very interesting question of what constitutes a religion, and we need to know that because we need to know what the legal treatment is.
Right. So, but give it to me in easily digestible.
Sure.
So what constitutes a religion?
So that's a great question.
Yeah.
And
Are there like bullet points that you can distill it down to?
Sure. So let's talk about what constitutes a religion from the matter of law. Okay. The Supreme Court, believe it or not, has never really addressed the issue. Right? They've looked at it a few times, and at their most expansive, which was during the Vietnam War, you had a number of conscientious objectors. Those are the people who said, I can't be drafted. I can't go to war because being a soldier and maybe shooting somebody would violate my conscience. And there was a question of, well, if you belong to a religious order or a religion that says you have to be a pacifist, I understand what that means. But you had a whole bunch of people who said, no, I don't belong to any particular religion. It just violates my conscience. And the Supreme Court said, well, any deeply held conviction that plays a role in your life parallel to the belief in a creator qualifies as a religion.
But that's not a religion.
Well, that was the Supreme Court at its most expansive.
That was the Warren Court, was it not?
I was going to say, who was on the Supreme Court?
Then they backed away from that a little. But when it comes to asking what is it a religion in terms of imposing a religion, nobody knows. Now, there's an interesting thing, which is if you look at religions around the world and throughout history, they're much broader than what we usually think of as religion. And this is
wait. Explain that. What is it?
Yeah.
What is it? When you say broader, what does that mean?
So this is a weirdness of the Western world. If you go to, say, an Islamic country, or you go to Muslim world, there is no line where people say, oh, well, that's the Islamic religion. Those guys over there praying, that's the Islamic religion. But this restaurant that doesn't serve alcohol, that's just culture. Right? The lines between religion and culture and lifestyle and way of life are very blurry. It's
As
only
opposed to the separation of church and state here. So
well, that's right. And that's because we have this really weird, and when I say weird, I mean it is the exception among global cultures. Western culture, Christendom, really, out of Europe, came up with this idea that you can partition out religion. And you can say, okay, well, religion is how you worship, right? It's the words, it's which house of worship you go to. Do you go to a synagogue or a mosque or a Catholic church or any one of any number of Protestant denominations? That determines what your religion is. And, then do you say your prayers in Latin or English or Hebrew or Arabic? That'll determine what your religion is. And maybe you got a couple of dietary laws. But there's this really interesting thing. If you look on Wall Street, there's a whole category called Islamic finance. Now, why do Islamic countries need their own finance? I mean, what does finance have to do with religion? Well, it depends who you ask. If you ask most people who ever lived anywhere in the world at any point in history, they'll say, well, finance determines how you deal with other people and other businesses, and that's a key part of our religion. If you ask those of us who live in the United States, we'll say, no. Lending, borrowing, that's economics. That's
right.
fine.
So wait a minute. And I need to jump in and interrupt for a second because I need to get back to I still want to answer the question, is wokeism a religion as you've posited and because I've read some of your book. It's a great book. And folks, New Civil War, go get it. It's worth the read. If I can understand it, so can you, right? So, because I'm not the brightest guy in the room, but I want to come back to this question: is wokeism a religion? And I know you want to say, let's first define religion, but let's flip this a little bit.
Yeah.
Is wokeism a religion? Yes or no?
So my answer is yes.
Okay, why?
To go back to the definition I was talking about, what does wokeism have that's unusual? Well, it's got its own view of sex. Right? It's got its own view of morality.
You mean sex as gender or sex as in the
gender? Right. It's got its own view of sex and gender and humanity and the appropriate relations between different people who might want to form a family. It's got its own view of morality. Right. It's got its own view of evil. They call it racism. When the woke talk about systemic racism, they don't mean you don't like black people. What they mean is there's this pervasive sense that runs through all of society that is always there, even when you can't see it, that colors everything that you do. Well, Christians call that evil. Right? I mean, it's always there, or sin. Right? It's this pervasive sense that's always lurking in the background. It's got its own view of the end of times. You can talk about Armageddon. You could talk about you could talk about Ragnarok if you like Norse mythology. They talk about climate change, right? I mean, what is climate change? Well, it's not the Earth is getting a little warmer, right? That's the science of climate change. No. When the woke talk about climate change, they have this idea that we are living out of harmony with nature.
End times. It's like the book of Revelation. Oh my God. Well, that just hit me.
Right. It's exactly end times, right? We're living out of harmony with nature. And if we don't change and radically alter the way that we live, the earth, seas, and skies will rise up to smite us down. Okay. This is it, right? You're out of harmony with nature. You need to repent or nature will smite you. That's an end time story. Okay. You look at it. I had an article I came out with last year where I talk about gender identity. Okay. What is gender identity? It's actually really interesting when you think about it. Suppose you have somebody who's born with genetics that say male.
That would make them a guy. Excuse me. That would make them a guy.
That would make them right. Physiology that says
Yeah.
male.
Right.
Endocrinology, right? Your hormones say male, but you think you're a female. Okay. Well, according to the woke, that makes you a woman. Now, how do we get that to make sense? Well, you could say, well, what we have here is a crazy man, but that's not what they say. Right? That might be what you believe. It might be what I believe. It's not what they believe because they belong to a different religion.
So what do they believe? Is this like a caterpillar shedding its skin or something?
No,
like
no,
you were
no,
born?
No. You know, I am. The other thing that you forgot is
Or the caterpillar going into a butterfly? What?
I was originally a computer scientist. So let's think about what's going on in this brain that's a computer. Okay. I've got genetics and physiology and hormones that say male. But my brain correctly perceives that I'm a female. What's going on here? Well, there has to be some other signal going into the brain.
How do you know it's the brain? How do you know? Are we measuring brain waves now?
Well, wait. Well, because it's what you say and what you express. All right. No.
Well, excuse me. I have to interrupt you, Bruce. As I've told Ericka, I identify as a black lesbian who lives in San Francisco because I want some of the reparations money.
Right. And here's the thing.
I just had to put that out there.
Wait. If they were talking about
self-identifying,
something observable and testable, we could actually discuss it and have a rational discussion. But they're not.
With these people?
There's nothing that, when somebody comes in who, for all intents and purposes, appears to be male, but declares themselves female, and the woke conclude this is truly a woman. There are no tests that you can run to see, is this really a woman or is this a mistake? There's nothing you can observe.
You can always have them take off their clothes.
No, not according to their religion.
No, this is religion. Okay. And what's more, therapy won't help.
Ericka, you need to help me on this.
I know. It's so hard to follow.
Therapy won't help because it's not driven by your experiences. You're born with it, right?
Yep.
You're born with it. Okay.
That's crazy.
So what do I have? So I'm born with this internal, innate something that's telling me who I am that is truer and more accurate than my body.
Oh my God, it's like the Holy Spirit almost.
It's the soul. It's the soul.
Therefore it's a religion.
Well, you can go down the line, one thing after another. They've got a concept of evil. They've got a concept of the soul. They've got a concept of the self. They've got a concept of sex relations.
And even there's even like a confessional, right? How do you demonstrate that you're saved and you're part of the faith?
Yeah.
Well, you have a confessional. Oh, Black Lives Matter. You got the black square. You got the rainbow in your profile.
Yeah, and now we have to police misinformation and disinformation. Why? Because people who aren't really with it enough might hear something that would lead them down a path of improper behavior. Well, those are called anti-blasphemy laws. Okay? They've been around for a long time. That's why there are always blasphemy laws. People whose faith might be wavering or might not be that sharp might hear something that would convince them to give up the true religion for a false one.
So it's like heresy. There's like heresy laws.
Yeah.
And rules. Oh my gosh.
Well, I can tell you one thing that makes it a religion.
Yeah.
To me, beyond not all else, but certainly one of the key things that makes it a religion is the level of intolerance to the non-believer.
Yeah, level of intolerance to the non-believer. And then, as the years go by, we keep getting more and more and more. Look at the gift that keeps on giving for these people. I mean, first of all, it was a not terribly scary respiratory ailment, but every good faith needs an epic, a plague. And for the woke, was a potential plague of biblical proportions that we were able to avoid only because the anointed expert class, their priests, came through and told us how to save ourselves. How did we save ourselves? Well, we wore masks, which are, of course, a religious garb. That's how you know who's faithful. Okay? We forced people to get vaccines because that's a rite of passage. Maybe somewhere between baptism and circumcision, but it's certainly a rite of passage. But even more than that, even more than that, remember early on we were supposed to wash our hands and time it by singing "Happy Birthday" to you. Happy birthday! Anybody remember that?
Yep.
Okay.
I've been trying to forget.
Okay, how many faiths have a ritual at some point where you wash your hands while chanting something? Okay, early on, and I say this as someone who lived in New York City, you had to spray Lysol on your mail or your groceries before you
Yeah,
could bring it
anything
in.
cloth, paper bags. It was
Yeah,
like
well,
all your groceries, everything.
right. So if you ever heard of a faith that believed that it's
Oh,
important to keep
Leviticus.
your home pure, and there are potential impurities out in the world. So before we bring something in to our home, we must run it through a purification ritual, such as sprinkling it with holy water. Now, of course, everybody says, Lysol isn't holy water. To which I say, no, of course not. Holy water is water with a couple of special spices and incenses mixed in. Lysol is water with chemicals, so it's a completely different thing. It's also trade.
All right.
Right.
So
Well-
so hold that thought. That's good. That's,
I am like tripping out right now
you-
listening to Bruce talk about this stuff because, I've heard this concept of wokeism as a religion kind of for a while. And we have, we've talked about it and I've heard people talk about it, but the way that you're talking about it, Bruce, is hitting me in a way. I mean, it is literally like verbatim books of the Bible just repurposed, retooled.
I'll give you a really fun one that's really weird. Okay. When I read the Bible, the toughest stuff for me to understand is some of the rules of purification, like the detailed procedures that you have to go through if you think you might be a leper. Okay. It's in the most boring part of Leviticus. Right? And what are those rules? Well, if you see a potential symptom, you go to a priest who looks at it and runs a little test, and then quarantines you for a week, and then runs another test.
Oh my God!
And if the first two tests are negative, then you're cleared to re-enter society. But if either one is positive, you have to go outside society where you're held off in total isolation until you start seeing an improvement. At which point you wait a fixed number of days before going back to the priest for another
it
test.
sounds
After
to me.
which you
Oh
can wave a couple of incantations and you're readmitted to society. Now, I happen to be reading that early in the pandemic, and I'm looking at this going, these are exactly the same procedures, exactly the same. I mean, down to the 1 week, 2 week. I mean, it's and where you have to go and how often you have to test and how long you have to wait after the test. I mean, it's all there.
All right, so hold that thought because I know it sounds like we could go on for a long time. So let's stop at this point and let's say that wokeism is a religion. It's a huge assumption, and I understand there's a legal threshold that hasn't been established. I understand that the state really can't even define a religion or the government. I certainly understand the status of conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, which was sort of an expanded concept of separation of church and state. So under the assumption that wokeism is a religion, because I agree, it has all the tenets of a religion, how do you fight back against that? How do we fight back?
We actually have legal tools at our disposal, which, by the way, cut both ways. One of the reasons that I've been laying it out is that you need to lay the intellectual groundwork to make a case that when they start teaching this stuff, for example, in the public schools or imposing it in the workplace, that they are, in fact, establishing a religion. And I believe it.
Say that again. No, say that again for me. Give me that again.
When you go into a public school and teach systemic racism or queer gender theory, okay, that is imposing a religion, right? Now,
well, wait a minute. Is it okay? But they would argue that they're not. First of all, they don't want to be called a religion for all the obvious reasons. But they would certainly argue whether they're teaching queer gender theory or whatever that nonsense is that they're force feeding everyone. That is just an inclusive idea. It's an inclusive message to make everyone feel good or feel belonging.
Well,
they're not. I mean, that by itself doesn't rise to that threshold, though.
Well, it does. And that's a claim, by the way, okay? There are two very important universal faiths, Christianity and Islam. And Christianity and Islam would say exactly the same things, right? Our message is for all of humanity, right? The message that we bring from God is telling people how to live aligned with God's will and in harmony with each other. Right? That's exactly the same claim that both Christianity and Islam would make for everybody, including non-Christians and non-Muslims. That's what it means to be a universal faith. And you know, there's no problem with teaching this stuff as long as you teach it as something that some people believe. Okay? I find it completely
That's the intolerance. Everyone has to believe this or you're damned and you're going to hell.
Yeah, and that's the point. And one of the other things is that it's a matter of how you present it. If a Christian friend comes to me and says, as a matter of Christian faith, I believe that the wafer and wine of communion become the flesh and blood of Christ, I can accept that as a matter of their faith. If somebody came to me and said, look, man, it's simple biochemistry. Wafer, wine, communion equals flesh and blood. Then I'd say, great, let's go to a biochem lab and see if it works. Check it out. Okay? So, you know, the same statement, if you put it forward as an element of your faith, I think that's great. And I think it's important. And I think we should teach it. I think it's completely appropriate to teach that some people believe that race is the defining criterion of all of American history. I think it's horrible to teach that that racism is the defining criterion of American history. Right? I mean, this is the difference. Some people believe a man can declare himself to be a woman. Well, that's an accurate statement.
He can. It just doesn't mean that all of us have to go along with it and affirm it. And it's when you try to force it on everyone from the top down and impose the belief system that it becomes the problem.
Yeah, but wait a minute. And I agree with you, Eric, 100%. This cancer, because that's what this is. This is a cancer. Is so deeply penetrated now into federal government, the teachers unions, the stuff we talk about and rail about. So I was going to say, Dr. Abramson, you said call you Bruce. Bruce, how do we get it out? I mean, your book, The New Civil War, part of it is about the American Restoration. Mm-hmm. So how do you restore America to, let's call them those core values that we certainly, I would say preach here, but no one likes to be preached to, that we talk about on the show. How do you restore America in the face of this intolerant new religion that is being forced upon everybody?
So that actually touches upon two related things that I've written about. One is, I believe that the reason that this stuff is so pervasive is that America is suffering from a deep spiritual crisis. And that comes from a misunderstanding of our own spiritual traditions. And we need to reconnect with them. We need to reinvigorate traditional faith in this country. We need to reinvigorate.
But how? I'm a nuts and bolts guy. Tell me the hill. Tell me the mission. Tell me the hill. Tell me the materials I have to take the hill, and then tactically I'm going to go do that. How do we?
There are two things. First of all, the actual leadership has to come from within those faith traditions, and there are people and there are denominations who've been thinking a lot about it. But we also have to enable it. I mean, I think that we've done a terrible disservice in drawing these lines between religions and ideologies and philosophies, between symbols of faith and quote unquote secular symbols.
You mean separation of church and state has gone too far? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that what we have is not a separation of church and state. I think we have a denigration of church.
War on religion.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that we need
no argument here.
I think that we need to reopen that. But there's a broader problem that goes beyond that, and that is that contemporary society, I mean, life in the 21st century is very complicated. And we need a lot of advisors and we need a lot of experts and we need people to explain to us what's going on. We can't do all this stuff on our own. You can't build your own cars and understand your own insurance policies and do any of these things. We need people to tell us what's happening. Yet none of our institutions are trustworthy. There isn't a single major institution. By the way, every major institution has pockets of excellence and really good people on the inside. But the institutions themselves, I mean,
You mean the leadership. So you're talking rank and file versus leadership. It's the same argument we make about teachers unions. The leaders of the teachers are the issue. The teachers themselves generally try to do good work and try to be non-political, most of them.
yeah. So
I almost think it's backing up a little bit. I'm just listening to Bruce talk about leadership, right? And I know in my circles right now, there is a lot of conversation about what it means to be a lukewarm Christian, right? These are the people who have had an emotional experience, maybe of the Father or with the Holy Spirit, with Jesus. But then once something bad happens, they're not grounded biblically. So something bad happens and now their faith is challenged because they have no theology and they have no real belief system to go along with that feeling of love, or that experience of unconditional love. And then you have faith leaders who are not even, you claim to be a pastor of a church, but you aren't teaching biblical teachings. And so it's like there's a coming away, and the leadership is cowardice. And so they're not teaching theology to their flock, leaving them sort of open to the influence of these other things.
You know what the common denominator is to me, as I listen to Bruce, as I listen to you and I talking, in the prior shows, this does come down to whether it's in the realm of academia, in politics, in business. It's a failure of leadership, and we've allowed it and we empower it.
And that is actually the basic theme of the new Civil War. I mean, the new Civil War was a title that was chosen by my publisher, who thought that it would sell. I really wanted to focus on the book's primary theme, which is the corruption of our elite, starting in academia.
Yeah.
So republish the book with a new name. I like that. The corruption of the elite. It is.
Yeah. We have an elite class in this country, to which I belong. Okay? And these are the people who are, who have great credentials. Yep. I don't like to call them
all
educated.
The letters behind their names.
I don't like to call them educated because they aren't, but they are credentialed. They're affluent. They're professional. They're urban, and they run all of the major institutions. And the entire class is corrupt. It's entirely self-serving, and it's completely detached from society at large.
Bruce,
the only way forward is to rebuild our institutions, and you're starting to see it. The parent rights movement that is moving into school boards around the country is not going to work overnight, but that's how we retake and rebuild and restructure K-12 education. There's good work coming. Florida, I think, is probably the most advanced. There's important stuff happening in Texas.
Also Oklahoma. We documented it in the opening segment. The superintendent of schools, Ryan Walters, is taking on the teachers union and calling them what they are, Marxist, and promoting charter schools and merit pay for better teachers.
Right. I was about to go into higher ed. Right.
Okay.
But higher ed. Governor DeSantis in Florida has done phenomenal work trying to retake and reorient the public universities and colleges in the state. I believe just good work going on in Texas. I think there are a couple of other states. North Carolina, I know, has had some good things. But there is a movement to look particularly at public education and say, why are we doing this? Can we do it better? Can we get back to the original mission? So we are starting to see some efforts to retake our institutions. Who knows? Maybe it's someday we can even clean up the FBI.
I think you'd have an easier time cleaning up academia. Bruce, I want to thank you.
I think you'd have an easier time cleaning up Skid Row. Let's be
exactly. Well, look, they can't even clean up San Francisco, right? I mean, they're not going to clean. Yeah. That you know what? There's so much more, Bruce. We want to talk with you about. This has been fascinating, and thrilled for you to join us. We do have to go to break. I hope you'll come back, because
Anytime.
we didn't even get to the other part of your book, which was the fall of the American Republic after the 2020 election, and that will take up a whole nother segment. So hopefully you'll come back as a guest. Thank you for joining us. Ericka, you and I have to go to station break to make some money.
Anytime.
We'll be
Sounds
right
good.
back. America came into being based on a shared belief and a common set of values. Unlike other nations that were bound together based on common ancestry, race, or caste, we came into being based on a simple and shared set of ideals. That the power of government is based on the consent of the governed. That life, the freedom to live life on our own terms in our own way, free from government interference, and liberty, our most precious value, and the pursuit of happiness, which means we are free to pursue that which we choose with the knowledge and courage to know that nothing is guaranteed to us in this life. Those values, America was founded on these basic inalienable rights. Freedom to pray to God in our own way. Freedom to think and speak freely without fear of punishment or harm. And freedom to gather in our places of worship and in our local taverns. And freedom to defend ourselves, our families, our homes, and our neighbors as we see fit. The American Center for Education and Knowledge is dedicated to protecting American exceptionalism anywhere and everywhere it is threatened. ASIC is a 501c3 and depends on your tax-deductible donations. Please help us continue our fight.
Hey everybody, Ericka Redic, also known as Generally Irritable. Special shout out and thanks to our Of the People radio and podcast listeners and to our Rumble viewers. We've sort of had to give up on YouTube a little bit because they don't like the things that we say. So you guys make sure you go check us out on Rumble. And also while you're there, go ahead, click subscribe, follow Generally Irritable. You hear Robert and I talk about it a lot, and you might ask yourself, what's the difference? Well, at Generally Irritable, we're not just covering news and politics, but we're talking about how news and politics intersects with culture. We get to go to live events like the How Many More rally at the Austin Capitol, America Fest hosted by Turning Point USA, talk to and interview some of your favorite pundits, politicians, and podcasters to see what they think about where we are at in the American experiment today. Why do we do it? Because we believe that an engaged and informed electorate is the best way to save the American Republic. You'll even find cameos from our producer, Lord Benjamin, aka Lord Violence, aka A Darker Perspective. That's where you can find him on Twitter. You can find me on all of the socials under Generally Irritable, literally all of them. Twitter, you're going to find me as Ericka Redic, ERICKAREDIC. And most importantly, engage, because we need you to overcome the evil big tech overlords. You got to share, you got to comment, you got to like, you got to hit that Rumble button.